I think we might as well go ahead and get started, and you can catch up, I'm sure. So with that, I would like to call our meeting to order. The Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee meeting has now commenced. It is June 24th at 1 p.m. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak, to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. Beginning. Let's see. Now I will do the roll call. Kenny Wong.
Here.
Lori Mazurbo.
Present.
Ellen Solat.
I'm present. Thank you.
Ray Winch. I don't believe she is here. She may join us later. So with that, we do have a quorum. Let's see. So that's 1, 2 items down. The third item on our agenda is the City of Tucson Office of Equity update. Neto, is there anybody from the Office of Equity present?
No, there is not, Jay.
Moving on to number 4, any HCD updates?
Our liaison couldn't make it today, but I would just share with you that HCD is preparing to have in August a groundbreaking ceremony for the old bump steer site, which we call the old bump steer site. My brain just went for a moment. Sugar Hill on Stone, 60 some units of affordable housing, and work continues at the Amazon Motel on Miracle Mile for the second phase of the units there.
I recall fondly many yummy hamburgers and glasses of beer at the bump steer.
Anything else, Neto?
No, that's it.
All right, thank you, sir. Moving on to number 5, homeless prevention in Pima County, why we need more existing infrastructure gaps and best practices. And we have Keith Bentley and Zach Simmons with us today. Keith and Zach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jay. I just want to start by saying that I really appreciate the invitation to be here to talk to you all today. I also just want to mention I've just been in bed with COVID. I'm feeling better today, kind of for the first day. So this might be a little looser than usual. So please, I appreciate your forgiveness in advance. So we have such a small group here, and our presentation is quite long. So I want to encourage you all to interrupt, and let's make this dynamic. We can pause and have conversation. I don't want us to just be droning at you forever. But the reason why the presentation is so long is because I think this is an amazing opportunity. I think there's a real fortuitous coming together here. The project that is funding this presentation is a gift from the Garcia Family Foundation, specifically to look at homelessness prevention infrastructure in Pima County. You were provided with my recent gaps analysis, which I intentionally structured as a modestly alarmist call for enhanced homelessness prevention. And so this grant was kind of pursued to help support and bolster local efforts to improve our homelessness prevention capacity. So as I said to Lena, the ask for this specific presentation is a little early in our process, but we want to give you what we have so far. And I think what me and Zach discovered is that we have a lot already. And some of this is because I've been researching the homelessness system for years now, as has Zach. And so we have a lot of lessons about what has and has not been working. And homelessness prevention, unfortunately, is a space where things really have not been working very well locally, unfortunately. The positive side is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of improvements that we can make that I think are relative low lifts for the local government, and then all the way up to much larger lifts that we will get into the recommendations later. Yeah, Alan, please.
So just a quick question. You mentioned something about a gap analysis you sent. I don't think I have that, and I'm supposed to. So just to mention, I don't know what that is.
Okay, I will make sure that I send that to y'all directly. I'm going to review kind of the main punchlines of that report in the beginning of the presentation today. And Alan, just so you know, I don't think anything will be that surprising to you, just in terms of the broader picture. Okay, last thing very quickly, I think everyone here knows me well. Lori, I don't know how well you know me. I'm an associate research professor at University of Arizona. I work at CIRO, the Southwest Institute for Research on Women. I've been studying homelessness for about 20 years, but really applied locally for the last 5 years intensively. And my background is in sociology, and I got my degree in 2009 from UA. Zach, you want to just take a minute to introduce yourself and some of your experience locally in the system?
Yeah, so I lived in Tucson for the last 5 years, and during that time, I've been working very closely with like TPCH and was a case manager for homeless youth for quite a few of those years, as well as a committee member at TPCH for about 2.5 years now. I'm a coordinated entry committee, and as Keith was mentioning, have also been doing research in the space for homelessness in Tucson specifically for the last 4 or 5 years now as well.
And so me and Zach are going to be co-presenting. I'm very grateful to Zach for his kind of insider perspective on the system. I think it's been a really nice pairing in terms of our views from different perspectives. So without any further ado, let's get into it. And let me make sure that I'm doing this correctly. There we go. There we go. Okay, how am I doing? Screen look okay?
We're on URL.
Let's see. Any better? Nope.
No.
Okay, sorry, one more time. Let's try this one.
That's the built for zero.
I am so sorry, everyone. I've not had this problem. Let's do this. Okay, I'm going to get out of this.
No worries, Keith, we got time, so.
I'm patient too. If you're looking for your slides, I have them on my screen if you want me to share mine.
I have them. It's just as simple as not sharing here.
You want me to see if I have more success sharing on my end?
I got it. Okay, I'm sorry. Here we go. All right, let me try it one more time.
There we go.
Okay, so sorry. All right, so let's jump in. So I want to just start off with a couple preliminaries. And everything looks okay? Nothing's obscured?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to be talking about homelessness prevention today. I assume there's a lot of existing knowledge in this room around what this is, but I just want to kind of quickly say that there's a very expansive definition and a very kind of limited definition of homelessness prevention. So oftentimes people are thinking about very rapid, time-limited assistance to prevent the loss of housing. These types of interventions can be legal, like legal navigation, legal representation, DV services. These can be a wide range of supportive services. So landlord-tenant mediation, individual case management for a person, including like housing navigation supports, employment services, and tenant mental health or substance use services, or reentry services, all may support homelessness prevention. And then you also have financial assistance. So this can be one-time rental assistance, utility assistance, or different types of flexible funds, for example. So a lot of what we'll be focusing on and talking about today kind of sits within this very kind of downstream, urgent type of homelessness prevention. But I also just want to, recommend that we remember that there's a really wide range of prevention strategies that can start way upstream. And so policies, for example, like a minimum wage that's indexed to inflation. I see that as a very broad universal support that bolsters wages at the lower end of the distribution and promotes housing stability, like at a larger societal or community level. You can also think about prevention as being the promotion of affordable and stable housing in a community to make sure that people don't find themselves housing cost burdened. And then you get into what we think of as these more traditional interventions, right, that are happening when someone's in a crisis and you need to either divert them from homelessness, help them stay in the unit that they're in, or worst case, rehouse them and restabilize them if they've had to experience a bout of homelessness. So we're going to try to so part of what I want to say here is that this is really sprawling. And so trying to pack everything into one presentation is very unrealistic. We're going to focus today on kind of, again, this sort of low hanging fruit, like some of the really obvious headlines that we have from our kind of early research. And then down the line, we're going to come back to you and do another presentation that hopefully will be a little more focused on some other elements. And I also just want to mention that to encourage you to think of this as a part one, and that as we get through the presentation today, towards the end, it would be really helpful for us if you want to provide guidance with what you would like to see next, what kind of local research would be the most useful for you in the work that you're doing moving forward. Okay, so this is the breakout, the sections that we're going to go through. Some of these are a little shorter, some of these are longer, but again, please feel free to raise a hand, interrupt me, and we can take a pause at any time. All right, so first I just want to start with the kind of the case for improved local homelessness prevention. This is the gaps analysis that I was referring to, Alan, that we released, I think about 4 or 5 months ago now. Basically, as I said, I gave it this intentionally modestly alarmist title: increasing need, decreasing capacity to serve, an urgent case for local homelessness prevention. And basically the punchline that I'm going to walk through today is that the major drivers of high levels of inflow into homelessness, which are high rents and high home values, all remain elevated. And that by basically all indicators, we see either continuing increase of inflow into homelessness, or at a minimum, a leveling out at what is a very high level of homelessness for our local infrastructure, for our homeless service system, our response system. So rents have been flat. I'm not going to belabor these things that I think are straightforward. So rents have been flat. They're not getting worse. That's good, but they're not coming down. These high rents create a very unsustainable situation for lots of vulnerable households in Tucson. Home prices have leveled. So it's almost 3 years now that home prices have leveled, but they are leveling out at a height that's very high and very unaffordable for a lot of families in Tucson. We can see this decline. Yes, please.
I have a quick question. Could you go back to the previous slide? So one of the things that I see when I look at, because I've seen this kind of chart a lot, and obviously home prices went up, you know, starting in 11, 20, like really skyrocketing. But I just wonder, to me, it looks like if you go back to like 03, 04, and you were to follow the trend line from there, if that had stayed like relatively normal, that we would be at the prices that we're at now if that trend had continued. Is that, do I see that correctly? Am I missing something there?
Yeah, I see the line, and I see what you're getting at. I think it's a counterfactual that's super hard to answer, right? Like these are national markets affected by in this case a global recession and a credit crisis. So yeah, I think that there's a line there. However, there's not some particularly like linear rate of increase in these prices, right? That tend to be determined by a really large host of factors, both market factors, but also you know, spending on things like affordable housing, right? So federal funding decisions, local funding decisions. So yeah, so I see that, and I would have to consult a much more sophisticated economist than I to actually answer that question.
And the only reason I bring that up, and again, not to belabor it because it's not necessarily the point, but you know, it just makes me wonder if home prices, more or less, again, just looking at this graph, are kind of on trend of where they would have been had things gone normally, you know, 03, 04 to now. It just makes me wonder, like, what else, and you did mention this, but like, what else is going on that has made things so bad in terms of the housing crisis? So I'm not asking you to answer, but it does like kind of just sparked that question in my mind. So I just wanted to bring that
Yeah,
up.
if I could say something about that too, I think if you look at anything over the long run, right, like you follow 401ks, there are good years and there are bad years and there are pretty neutral years. But after 40 years of having one, you're likely going to be doing pretty well for yourself and going to see somewhere between like 4 to 7% growth annually. The shocks happen when there are huge dips, like right when you're about to retire, and then all of a sudden you lose 25% of your 401k. I think a similar thing is happening very recently. While if you track it over time, like yes, home prices are steadily increasing over a 25-year period, a couple percentage points a year. But when you see a spike that's almost 70% over 2 or 3 years, that's just unmanageable to keep up with wages, for example. So.
No, that's a good point, and maybe really the thing to focus on is not what I was just saying, but really the impact is different because starting 11/20 on this graph, like you said, the prices really skyrocketed, and that's maybe the more important part. So
yeah, well, like long run versus short term, there's a lot of short term pain right now, but in the long run, it'll likely even out. But as much as we can do to potentially alleviate the short term pain that real people are experiencing, I think would that's what we're trying to focus on.
for sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Razak. Thanks, Jay, for the question. I'll just add too that for me, the major issue here is that there's a ratio here of incomes to expenses, and so that is like you have to kind of adjust for that a little bit, which is a nice little segue into my next slide here, which is a really nice metric that shows the proportion of homes sold annually in Tucson that were affordable to a family earning the median income. And so as recently as 2020, so just over a 4-year period, 75% of homes sold in 2020 were affordable to a house earning the median income. This has fallen all the way to 38% in 2023. And so there's those rising prices, but there's also what's happening with household incomes. And so we see a really, this huge jump in terms of what's in reach for your typical family. And the thing I really want to belabor here is that this is a pretty profound shift in our local economic landscape. It's not something that can't change, as we've seen in the past, but this is a very big shift, which means that every year, right, thousands and thousands of families that would have moved out of the rental market into homeownership, into a mortgage, are no longer able to do so. Those homes are the ones that have more resources, who are able to pay these higher rents. And so they're staying in the rental market, continuing to put strain on our limited rental housing supply, and then are also able to kind of keep those rents high. So this really has a quite profound impact on our rental market. And this is an impact that's aggregating every year, right? We have population growth, we have people aging into home ownership. And as that happens, more and more people, again, are accumulating in the rental market. Okay, my joke about this slide is that this slide sucks, but let's walk through it really quick. I think I like it because it kind of pulls together, I think, all the major elements. So housing costs are up, right? Home value is up 42%, affordability down 50%. This is all over this 4-year period. Rents up 36%, according to Zillow. What's really important is that wages have also been growing at the lower end in Tucson, but in Arizona more broadly. And without going on a tangent here, the main reason for this is that in 2016, Arizona voters voted for a scheduled increase to $15 in the Arizona minimum wage, and then it become indexed to inflation. So since 2016, we've had steady increases in the minimum wage, and that is what has propped up and driven the majority of these increases in wages at the lower end of the income distribution here in Arizona. The benefit of this is that housing cost burden, which I expected to increase much, much more, has only increased by these still significant increases over a 4-year period, but it's been moderated by those income gains. And so we moved from, I believe, 51 to 55% of Tucson renters are housing cost burden, meaning they're paying over 30% of their income in housing costs. And that I think 26 to 29% of Tucson renters are severe housing cost burden, meaning they're spending over 50% of their income on housing costs. So that share of severe housing cost burdens increased by about 11%. That is a rather substantial increase over this 4-year period. And again, it's really indicative of these big jumps in costs. And then these are just 3 different metrics. This is our PIT count as measured annually in January, up 67%. Our coordinated entry assessments, so this is the number of households approaching the continuum looking for services, up 34%. And then we have this chronically homeless single adults by name list locally, and that has increased 86%. And I put this here because this is a group of folks that are particularly vulnerable and who really struggle to re-enter housing. And so we're having kind of an aggregation of these particularly vulnerable single adults in our community, I think as a result of these high rents and high home prices. Okay, this aggregation I'm talking about, this is our by name list. So these are people who are currently homeless, are seeking services, and have been in touch with a provider in the last 90 days. If you are not in touch in 90 days, you just fall mechanically off this list. If you enter housing, you come off of this list. So we see again here this kind of aggregation, especially of single adults on our by name list, to something around 2,500 in May, in April. And so this is, to me, you know, in a situation where some people are looking at metrics that are getting better, or they're looking at kind of continuing low unemployment numbers, this is very alarming that we continue to see aggregation of people experiencing homelessness. And to me is a kind of the broader point about high housing cost burden is not currently sustainable for a large share of Arizona households, vulnerable households here in Tucson.
Question, Keith.
Please.
I see at the beginning of the chart, there's a pretty big drop off in around 1120 in terms of overall numbers. Do you know why that is?
I do not specifically, but I'm sure it is a administrative shift in the way the list is being counted. I don't believe that that is any kind of real change in the number of people. I assume this is probably a shift in the way that they were counting, and I assume a lot of folks kind of fell off of the new time threshold they were using. Zach, I don't know if you specifically remember what was happening in late 2020, but that would be my best guess. I don't think this is data driven.
Yeah.
Or,
Lagging effect from temporary COVID housing as well.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, if it had to do with COVID, like the eviction moratorium, all the money that was going out. You know, if that really, I just was wondering if you could correlate like the amount of resources that became available to folks when COVID hit, and also the eviction moratorium, because, you know, to me, so much of this is about resources, and if we put more resources towards it, the systems we have in place to get people housed would get a lot more people housed. And so, you know, I just wonder if there's some evidence there that, you know, if you spend the money, put out the resources, that things improve for folks.
so Jay, I don't have the slides handy, but I'll say we have lots of information to support that narrative. In particular, sheltered homelessness. Well, it's complicated. Sheltered homelessness initially declined because we lost about half of our congregate shelter, but then we had these hotel programs come online during the COVID years. And so our positive exits from shelter, for example, were very, very high in the couple years where we had a lot of spending on that kind of more individualized non-congregate shelter. That's one place where we had more success in terms of people flowing through shelter to stable housing outcomes. That success, that high positive exit rate, which was in the area about 40% a couple of years ago, has fallen very dramatically to about 19% now. And so this is an area where I think clearly that extra spending was providing more shelter and was providing a more successful pathway for people to exit shelter to housing, and is definitely one of my specific recommendations for TPCH in terms of their internal advocacy for what works. I'll just also mention we have other system performance metrics that also, I think, positively reflect on that investment in those years.
Because I do think that for me, part of what is needed is we do really need to actually focus on the narrative about what's going on, because I feel like a lot of what we talk about is like, what are the things in the system that mechanically could be tweaked to get more people housed? And obviously that's always going to be the case, right? There are always ways to improve the system, but what it's really about is about more housing for people, and it's about more resources. And, you know, it's not like, oh, we just need to find the 5 tweaks to the current system and we're gonna have a lot better outcomes. But really it's about, you know, the problem is that we don't have the resources available So again, that's the narrative that I've developed just by looking at the data and obviously hearing your presentations over time, Keith. But I do, for me, I think it's important to have that as the backstory. So when we go to mayor and council with recommendations that cost money, there's a reason that we're asking for resources as opposed to recommending like, hey, you just need to tweak these 3 things in the current system and the problem will be solved. So again, that's the narrative I've developed, and whether or not that's totally true, I don't know, but I appreciate that.
I'll say broadly, I strongly agree, and I think the data supports that. And actually, it's kind of one of the main punchlines of this gaps analysis is basically to say the current system is massively overwhelmed by inflow. We can only serve a fraction of people who are becoming homeless. And so there, regardless of efficiencies that people like me and Zach are working very hard on at TPCH already in collaboration with leadership, how can we make the system faster, more efficient, and use existing dollars as well as possible? These realities coexist, right? Like you said, the system can be improved, but there's just a massive resource mismatch, which is very relevant for this conversation because hopefully homelessness prevention, more investment there can reduce some of that broader burden on our homelessness response system. Okay, so this is maybe one of the few pieces of good news I have for you. These are different metrics of homelessness here in Tucson. So this is our pit count in green. Widely recognized as a massive undercount. We had a modest increase in 2025. Those data were just recently released. So no major increases as measured by the pit. Our sheltered homelessness is if people served in sheltered housing programs through, as we can see through the HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. And the last one I put here, which I think is very important, and I've been pushing quite hard in my research locally, these are the number of coordinated entry assessments. So this is the first step to accessing homelessness services from any of the providers in TPCH. And so this is the number of people who are currently homeless and seeking services. And these are the number of unique households. And so we see that we had something like 7,600 households. This fell a little bit in fiscal year 2024 to 74,000. But this number of households is very high. It's also very high relative to how the economy is doing. Generally, when unemployment is low, we wouldn't see so much inflow. And this is the point that I really want to stress, is that we're only able to serve a subset of these folks that are seeking services. And when I say serve, I mean serve in any type of program. So this is the proportion of inflow as measured through coordinated entry assessments that were served in any type of project. Now, the vast majority of these households are being served in emergency shelter, and a much smaller fraction are being served in what people think of as housing programs, right? PSH, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, et cetera. So we see the share has been declining in the last 2 years. For every household that approaches the continuum and completes a coordinated entry assessment, we've been able to serve less than a third of those households, again, in any type of program. And I really want to emphasize that most of this, something like 80% of this is emergency shelter, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, does not have a very high positive exit rate. So most people who are in emergency shelter in recent years are exiting back to homelessness, and only about 20% of them, very roughly, and a little bit less than that, are actually exiting to a permanent housing destination. So again, we're serving a fraction of people inflowing. Most of those people are not successfully transitioning into housing. Only about 40% of people served, again, through any program, exit to a permanent housing destination. So system is kind of overwhelmed. We're only serving a fraction, and then a lot of people are kind of falling back into homelessness as they move through that system. Okay, and again, I just have to belabor this. Unemployment is historically low. There's a lot of concerns about prices. There's a lot of concerns about economic uncertainty. But even to date, unemployment remains quite low. So we can't really blame this on a softening economy, but we can blame this on this income price mismatch between housing costs and what people are earning. I also put this up because I'll say this again and again. I'm very concerned about the next recession. When the economy slows down, we're going to see the impact of this really high housing cost burden that we have now on things like homelessness, food insecurity, and et cetera. Okay, so this is just some of, let me see. Yeah, this is the main conclusion from this report. So I have a lot of recommendations, some of which are for, as you mentioned, Jay, system reforms, tweaks that can improve the system, but also for a broad case for increased funding both for our existing homeless response system and for prevention to reduce this overburden on the system. And my recommendation for local government providers and funders is that we really ideally would have some local government office. Also could be a nonprofit entity, but it really makes sense for it to be a government agency in my mind, to house, direct, and staff an effort to build a community approach to homelessness prevention. So when we get to the end of this presentation, we'll talk a little more about what that would look like. But this really needs to live somewhere and be directed. Partners like me or academics locally I think are very interested in supporting this effort, but this really needs to be staffed, in my opinion, for this to have a cohesiveness and to show that there's some investment and buy-in by the local government to kind of encourage other partners to collaborate and step into the space.
So Keith, I have a question about this that I don't totally understand. So there's TPCH, and then there's, I know it's not the same type of thing, but then there's the HMIS. Why are those entities not doing this, and what would the difference be?
So great question, Jay. I appreciate it. So HMIS is simply the data system that HUD requires the continuums to use. So TPCH has to report into HMIS, and providers that take money from HUD have to report into HMIS. So HMIS is just a data system that I've been using to track some of these outcomes, and that TPCH uses to report to HUD on system performance, things like that. TPCH, Tucson Pima Collaboration and Homelessness, that refers to the continuum, the providers that take federal funds, and what they do. There is very little funding for homelessness prevention federally, and the funding that is available is very hard to use and practice because it has an extremely low AMI threshold. I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, but I think you have to be below 30% of AMI to qualify for homelessness prevention. The line I've heard from caseworkers over and over is that if you're already below 30% AMI, you're usually homeless already. And so prevention funds are very difficult to use for households above that threshold who are kind of what you would think of as like traditionally at risk of homelessness, where you would want to use those funds. So providers have been doing homelessness prevention through their own philanthropic funds, through other grant funds, or other grants that don't have that specific restriction. Why I do not see TPCH as kind of the logical home. I think TPCH is a very important partner, would obviously want to collaborate heavily around prevention, and many providers that are already providing prevention services would be a part of this collaborative effort to kind of bolster and improve our homelessness prevention system. I don't think this should sit with TPCH specifically, because TPCH is incredibly underfunded and understaffed, in my opinion. TPCH struggles to cover an extraordinarily wide range of responsibilities that they have to do already, which in my opinion are already underfunded, and then have to meet a huge range of demands from community members, from local government, to collaborate on new initiatives, to do research. And so I see my role as Zach's role. We've been really heavily subsidizing TPCH in terms of data analysis, research support, best practice research, things like this. And I guess I'm saying I see this as an org that is already profoundly overburdened. And so moving upstream to focus on prevention, I think would logically sit at a broader entity, because TPCH is really focused on homelessness response. Like once you are homeless, TPCH is going to ideally support you and try to help you restabilize and re-enter housing, right? But as I've mentioned, it's very hard for them to do that given the overwhelm, and then adding the responsibility of building like a prevention system on top of that feels highly unrealistic. So, and to say, the way in which homelessness prevention ideally should be very cross-sector. We need to be thinking about access to healthcare, access to benefits. We need to be thinking about employment. We need to be thinking about substance treatment. And so there's a much broader view that I think prevention can take, and involves lots of different systems. That complexity also to me feels like something that is quite beyond the capacity of TPCH, unless they were to receive substantially more funding and staffing to do that. But that is not something that they're going to get from the feds. I'm so sorry that went on for so long, but that's my very brief effort to answer that briefly.
And then the other question I have in that same vein, is there another entity, whether it be government locally or nonprofit or whatever, that is attempting to do this, or is really nobody trying to coordinate these efforts at this point?
I think there are definitely a handful of leaders. There are people at Cashew, Community Health, Safety and Wellness, the City of Tucson, who I think are really thinking very seriously about what role can their office play in terms of being, for example, like a primary contact point for housing and security services through 311, for example. I know Jen Darlin at Pima County is thinking very expansively about how to be involved helpfully in system change in this space in her role as the director of the Office of Housing Opportunities and Homelessness Solutions. We also have a lot of experience in Pima County, particularly through EELS and the Sullivan Jackson Center, in terms of providing family sustainability counseling, in terms of providing rental assistance and eviction prevention resources. So I think we have a lot of the pieces, but we still need, but we do not have a coordinated system, and we do not have a coordinated first touch point. And so we do need, I ideally would love to see a collaboration between the City of Tucson and Pima County, and Jen's office in particular, and HCD seem to me the logical players to kind of collaborate in this space. But I also want to be kind of like very careful about the details of those recommendations. But I think there is a lot here. And again, this is my the staffing part. I think we just need a pretty modest amount of staffing to have some dedicated people really focused on this that I think can carry this work forward and literally just do that time-consuming work of the networking and the convening that would be needed to kind of build a more logical system.
And you may talk more about this later in your presentation, so feel free to answer what you think is appropriate at this point to this. But if that were to happen, what do you think the immediate benefits, or I'll just ask, what would the benefits be of the type of coordination that you're talking about? How would it work? And then, I think one of the things that, ever since I've been in the nonprofit world, everybody's talked about, being in silos and how do we break free from them. And here we are still in silos, these many years later. How do you get folks to break out of their silos? And not only that, but then, you have to play nice together with other folks who are also competing for the same money. So again, I know there's a lot in that question. It's more about details of how this might work, but again, I just wonder, like, if we were to recommend this, as the Housing Commission, what would we recommend, and kind of what level of detail would we recommend based on, like I said, what would the benefits be of coordination? How would it work, and then how do you get folks to play nice together to make it happen?
Jay, I love the question. It is so practical and really aligned with my interest in kind of rapid movement in this space. So I think, the way I look at this, there literally are like multiple handbooks. There's a federal handbook that I'll mention in this presentation, like how to set up a local homelessness prevention system. You identify your partners, you convene, you identify roles, and then what I think is really important here is that there has to be cost sharing. And again, I think the major players are the two local entities, Pima County and City of Tucson. I think there are places where Pima County has kind of a deep lane and an established role. I think City of Tucson also has specific spaces within the homelessness prevention space where they already are operating and have some expertise. So I think the idea is that you identify roles that entities will play, and you can even think about this in terms of types of clients that would be served, right? We can work from the known need to the type of literally like, how many caseworkers will we need to serve this volume of clients over time? And these clients are coming from different inflow sources. Some of them are coming from eviction, some of them are re-entering from incarceration, some are exiting from substance use treatment, some are fleeing abuse. Those are very different inflow pathways. And I think whether the county, a nonprofit, or the city should be the major referring agency in each of those cases, those are decisions that I think need to be made and collaborated so that ideally, hopefully, some more central entity can refer people appropriately to those supports, whether they be county or city. And I do think the county has kind of more resources directed for homelessness prevention than has been the case in the past. I hope personally that this will help make a case for the city also to find ways to raise revenue for this space. But I see the county is kind of already putting its money where its mouth is in terms of actually investing in the homelessness prevention infrastructure. And so I really think that is how we start to break down silos. And I'll just very quickly say, there are lots of practical ways that silos are broken. One of those are, high level convenings where people are coordinating across systems, but silos are also broken at the individual through things like case conferencing, where you have a person in a particular situation, and then you have representatives basically advocating or trying to help that person coming from these different siloed systems. So you have someone there from Access, you have someone there who's has experience with substance abuse treatment, you have a housing person there. And so, employment support. And when you have those representatives convening, even if it's at the individual level, that's a place where the silo is broken down for the individual in practice. We've been doing a lot of this already through the HCC work, the Housing Central Command work, and there's also kind of a broad push within TPCH to move to this broader cross-silo model, this kind of case conferencing model at a higher level within the system. So I think we have a lot of momentum moving towards this collaboration already. And so I actually see it as something that is a much lighter lift now. It's always hard, but a much lighter lift than it's been in the past. Okay, let's get into the next thing. So this is me trying really hard to give you kind of a rough sense of what is the need, what's the volume of need, and what is inflow looking like locally. So this is from the gaps analysis I keep mentioning. I just want to stress that this is from the fiscal year 2023, so October 22 to September 23. This is the Census Household Pulse Survey. This is the estimated proportion of households estimated count of households in Pima County that were not current on average in any month in this 1 year period. Of these households, a much smaller share thought they were very likely to experience an eviction in the next 2 months, about 2,500 households. We had an average of about 1,000 eviction filings monthly in this period, about 623 calls to 211 for housing and shelter assistance. And during this period, we saw about 747 applications, coordinated entry applications. So these, again, households who are homeless seeking services from the continuum. A couple things have gotten a little better relative to that previous time period. Evictions have gotten lower, but we're still in the area of about 900 a month in recent months. So this is like lower here. We have this decline. It's definitely lower than 1,200. But I kind of don't want to overemphasize this too much, because this is still a lot of evictions happening monthly. And again, it's still a lot of evictions happening during very low unemployment. On the other hand, something that seemingly has gotten worse is the volume of calls to 211 for housing assistance. So these are total calls related to housing and shelter, something in the area of 700 to 800 a month in recent months. And these calls are primarily for rental assistance, shelters, and low-cost housing. So these are even more elevated than in prior years. So we don't have.
I just want to let you know, I think we had you scheduled for 50 minutes, but I think what you're providing is just critical for us trying to come up with a plan. So don't worry about the time limit. We're going to go until 2:30, and I'd say, the bare minimum that I'll need to kind of wrap up is maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So unless there's objection from the rest of the committee, you can just keep rolling.
I just want to add my 2 cents. Totally agree for Keith to keep going.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all. I appreciate that. I am going to economize on some of these, so I will rush through some of these so that we have more time for a conversation. But thank you, Jay. Okay, we don't have the Census Household Pulse Survey right now. It's coming soon. We should have it later this summer. But updating this to a recent 6-month period from last November to this April. So again, this is average monthly counts of evictions. So around 900 a month. Calls to 211, we're around 850. This is up relative to before, but our coordinated entry assessments are down. So in the area of 750, now we're down to about nearly 600. So some modest decrease in intensity here, but I also want to I keep mentioning these numbers because if I think about this as like a caseload volume, like we need to serve these people in a more substantive way, these still feel to me quite manageable If we think about local government staff referring to agencies, this seems like something we could do a substantially better job in terms of serving these people early on when they're reaching out for help. Okay, this is something I was able to pull from HMIS data. So what this is again, for the 6-month period from last November to this April, for each month, how many households applied for services for homeless because they are homeless through a coordinated entry assessment. So as I said a moment ago, there are about 572 households applied monthly in this recent 6-month period. And then they're also asked what their current living situation is when they apply. The vast majority of people are either experiencing unsheltered homelessness, so they're sleeping in a car, living outside, etc., or they're in a shelter. So about 88% of people at this point are actively homeless, and that is why they are doing a coordinated entry assessment. That is not helpful for us to understand inflow, right? Because the people already inflowed, right? So we don't know where they're coming from. But I do think this is very useful to look at that remaining, now it's only 12%, but of those remaining 12%, we see that a good chunk of them, about a third, are inflowing from institutional contexts. And this is literally like 3 households a month on average, 3 households coming from jail on average, 1 household coming out of a psychiatric hospital. And then here, I really want to emphasize this. We have about 12 households averaging a month exiting a substance use treatment and directly entering homelessness. These, to me, are examples of very low-hanging fruit places where we can do better exit planning with housing navigation or reentry support for people who need more substantive reentry support. These are people who we know where they are, and we have an opportunity to connect with them to have a more stable transition into housing. And so this is one of my recommendations, is to bolster our reentry services for people leaving institutional contexts. Here we have people inflowing directly from being a homeowner, very rare, being a renter with just no subsidy, about 7 households a month, right? So a very small chunk of these people are coming directly from the rental market. These folks would be served by things like EULs or eviction prevention. And then we have these very temporary situations, staying with family, staying with friends, hotels. These folks are hard to reach and they're hard to connect with. And so I'm going to set that aside for now. But then we also have about 10 households a month that are falling out of transitional housing directly back into homelessness. This is another area where I think there's some obvious exit planning, navigation support. These are people we've already enrolled in housing programs that we can provide a little more support to make sure that we don't waste this money we've already invested in housing those folks. So again, about 88% already homeless. These folks are inflowing from institutions. I really think there's a prevention opportunity here. And then again, clearly, I think a strong prevention opportunity to not let these people fall back into homelessness that we've served. Okay, but why did all these people become homeless? So one resource that we can pull on is a 2023 needs assessment that I conducted with co-researchers for the city of Tucson, where we asked people, what was the main reason you became homeless? Most people could say more than one reason, but most people said only one reason. So if we look at these main reasons, we see that there's these very different buckets in terms of what drove people to become homeless. So in this largest bucket of financial hardship, the biggest chunk, the single major cause of entering homelessness was eviction, and then job loss, trouble supporting yourself financially. Either the rent is too high or you can't come up with income. So kind of a income expense mismatch or loss of your housing through an eviction. The next major category was left a housing situation with no place to stay. The majority of these folks were released from jail. Some people left programs, and then sort of this split between people who exited programs on their own, or they exited from a supportive housing program and re-entered homelessness. These are also, as I just mentioned, really obvious places where I think we know where people are, and we often know when they're about to enter homelessness. And so a real opportunity to prevent re-entry there. These last reasons, I'm just going to rush through these, but the point is being kicked out, rejected by family, or experiencing abuse at home. These are kind of like traumatic events that occur in the household, cause a crisis, cause a very short-term crisis that needs immediate resolution. This is harder to address with prevention. It's hard to get upstream. Substance abuse, changes in household composition, right? These are also like one has to do with treatment and support, healthcare access. Another one has to do with changes in household composition, right? Like a divorce or a death in the home. Now you have an income expense mismatch. So those folks need like planning to get themselves in a more sustainable situation. That's kind of case management, maybe grief counseling, healthcare, right? Some people are, again, because of health, mental or physical health issues, they're in an unsustainable situation. This is a healthcare system access, but also a situation where people may need housing navigation to negotiate to more sustainable situations. But part of the point here is that these are complex and very diverse inflow sources, and we need to find ways to serve people and meet the unique needs that they have. Okay, that took much longer than we expected, and I want to apologize in advance. I'm now going to turn it over to Zach, who will take us through the next 3 sections and talk about some of his research on our current homelessness prevention system.
All right, so I just wanted to start out by giving like a pretty good landscape of what our current prevention system looks like, Keith. Yeah. So these are the 17 organizations who in the past year or have provided prevention services, either legally or financially, and expect to hopefully continue throughout the next year. Not all of these 17 organizations do have assistance and availabilities every single month. But that's why we did a little bit of a wider range to really capture over the course of a year what the landscape looks like. Next slide. So just going through some of the requirements of the services to really see what people looking for these services need to meet to be able to access them. So out of these 17 services, there were 4 legal and 13 financial assistance. And the financial assistance is a combination of one-time, which is able to be accessed once every 12 months, so once a year, or short-term, which sometimes lasts anywhere between 3 and 6 months, where they're able to subsidize income to meet the deficit that people are facing for rent. As far as the requirements go, to access these services, more often than not, you need to actively be facing eviction, having been like served an eviction letter already. Sometimes you're able to just get access to these services by proving that you're behind on rent, but it's at least 1 to 3 months, depending on the program. Some of the programs require that your utilities have been shut off to receive certain assistance. And just about all the homeless prevention programs have some sort of income requirements, especially the one-time prevention programs. And this is like a really odd sort of niche range, but you need to make sure that you're making enough money to where it's going to be sustainable and you're not just going to end up in the same situation next month. But you can't make too much money because you have to fit that requirement of the deserved poor to make sure that we're giving the money to the people who need it the most, and we're not just giving out free money. So those are the current requirements for a lot of these programs. And Keith, if you want to go on the next slide. So there are a lot of pros to having so many services. There are a couple cons as well, but I just wanted to go over some of them. So having 17 different organizations, this can really offer people more opportunities and more diversity to choose from. So if they have had a bad experience in the past with a certain organization and they don't want to work with them again, they can always go to another provider. So it gives people the opportunity to work with who they want and gives people client choice, which is a pretty good positive. Having diversity of programs also allows for specialization. So organizations can hyper specialize, working specifically with like families, veterans, former foster youth, current foster parents, etc. And so having multiple organizations really allows for that hyper specialization, which is great, making sure that all the different communities are served, while also not only having hyper specialized services, so everyone's able to get access. And in addition, having a diversity of programs really helps fill out those sort of short-term needs, long-term needs, single-time services, supportive services, as well as legal services. There are unfortunately some downsides. So the other side of this coin is having too many services can often lead to inefficiencies. If there's no centralized referral process that we were already talking about or coordinated system between agencies, this can lead to a lot of confusion. It can lead to inefficient referrals. It can lead to people just sort of being stuck in the middle and not knowing where to go. If clients are told that like agency A has this requirement, they might assume that agency B has the same requirements, even if they're operated under different funding sources and they do have different requirements, which can create situations where people have misinformation, which can lead to a lot of frustration and can lead to people not getting the services that they would otherwise get. In addition to this, programs sharing the same funding sources can often lead to expanded overhead costs and limit how far that funding could really go. And so, there's an argument to say that consolidating services could actually increase the number of people you're able to serve. Keith, next slide. So just looking at very rough supply demand numbers and some of the research I've done in the last couple of weeks, I ended up calling a bunch of agencies, all 17 of the agencies listed above, to try to get a general idea of what the inflow was compared to how many households they're able to serve. Just a quick note, these numbers aren't deduplicated, but we did use some estimates to try to figure out how many, what the demand was per month. So for the legal services, we sort of determined there were about 250 calls per month in the community, so 250 households in need of legal services, with the single most agency getting about 125 calls a month. And then when it comes to financial services, there were about 1,000 calls a month for households seeking financial services, with the single agency receiving 800 calls a month, so quite a bit. Looking at the supply end of that, the legal end is only about 120 households able to be served throughout a month, with the single agency being able to serve about 60 at most. And then for financial assistance, the services per month are about 50 to 100, but this fluctuates greatly with funding. Right now, we do actually have quite a bit more funding. I'm assuming if we were to expand that over the last few years, that number might actually go down. And the most from a single agency is only about 20 to 25 per month. And a lot of that is temporary funding. And so the gap here is really only about 50% of the households are in need of legal assistance are served, or only 5 to 10% of households in need of financial assistance are served. So that's pretty jarring. And next slide, Keith. One of the quotes just from the community assistant division, the person who is on the working the phones there just told me, the phones are constantly ringing 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. And that was after me asking her, how many calls would you say you get? And she just wasn't able to quantify it at all. Alan, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to have a comment, which is the 50% of households in need of legal assistance are served. That figure doesn't jive with the previous one. And when Keith was talking about the number of eviction filings monthly was over 800. And
Yeah, so
get that.
these are people actively seeking services. So these are from inflows of calls that these agencies
Okay,
get.
I get you.
So while there are a lot more,
The need is way greater than that, I
the
guess.
need is way greater than that, but the people accessing services is lower than the actual need, and some of that is likely due to people being demoralized just from previous experiences. Next slide. So that's sort of what the current system looks like. And so now we're going to go into, what it looks like for people seeking these services. And TPCH did a recent evaluation in 2024 and did an evaluation with 20 people who have recently gone through the homelessness prevention programs or attempted to get funding for these programs. And these people really told us that they called many providers if they were connected. They were just given lists of people to call, and most of them didn't have funds. Applications varied, and the process for them were often pretty intrusive, and there were some privacy concerns there. There was a lack of follow-up and just delayed responses about outcomes. And when you're facing an eviction in an emergency situation, any sort of delay can be extraordinarily detrimental. And in large part, the experiences were really frustrating, depressing, anxiety-inducing, causing physical and mental harm. So these are just a couple quotes that we got from that. So one, I was jumping through hoops from October all the way until January. I was desperately looking, searching 211, every agency you could think of here in Tucson. I called them and it was very stressful. Again, this is a quote from somebody, not a personal opinion, but they said that 211 was useless. They never point you in the right direction. The people that answer the phone and speak with you don't seem to be trained. They have no skin in the game. We need somebody who will spend more time with you when it's needed. Next slide. Another one, I told them my story, and the woman said that it was sort of like the lottery and just said that you have to keep calling, but that they just weren't communicative. I wouldn't hear from them, then I'd reach out again, then email them, then they would email me back. They'd ask a few questions, then again, weeks later, And you can't get through to them. They wouldn't answer the phone. So I sat there waiting, and finally, weeks and weeks later, I got denied. Next slide. And then this one really stood with me too, speaking about those specialized services. I really thought when I was going to call a merge, they're going to have funding, get me the F out of this environment, like right now. Like they were going to say, absolutely, we have money, we have our own money, but they didn't. I was calling them and waiting on hold. I was like, do you guys even have financial assistance so that I can get out of my situation after I tell you my whole story? No, you need me to call this other number. And I was like, why did I even call? What do you even do? So this just really shows that a lot of people's experiences are, not great in this system, and there are a lot of things that need to be cleaned up here. Next slide. And so in these last couple of weeks, I started to do my own research and tried to figure out what pops up if I were in this situation, putting myself in their shoes, what pops up on Google, and you can go one more slide, Keith. After doing a Google search of various homeless prevention programs in Tucson and or Pima County and eviction prevention services in Tucson and Pima County, we ended up finding 15 unique results with 3 different shelters, 5 different directory agencies, and 5 different agencies that provided prevention funding through various financial and legal services. Some of them were out of date. The directory sites, such as like 211, some of them were more helpful than others. Some were just really out of date, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Next slide. So these are some of the results. Some of the links out of those 15 just didn't even work. There were 404 errors. The sites weren't supported anymore, and it just didn't work. A lot of others were out of date. Some were referencing CARES Act funds, which ended in 2022. A couple of the others, like the screenshots here, are showing that applications submitted before a specific date would be honored, but applications that are currently being submitted would no longer be accepted. These were often found in the fine print, and it would be really easy for somebody to go through the whole process of an application without realizing that it's actually been expired and that they have run out of funding for new applicants. Next slide. In addition, while calling these programs, there were often long wait times with an average about 12 minutes, with the longest wait time that I had just shy of an hour. And most lines had pretty complicated directories, such as like press 0, then 2, then 2. And if you don't know the terminology to really listen for, it could be really tough to navigate these. And especially if you're in a crisis, panicking, it could be extraordinarily difficult to navigate these systems. When I was able to get into contact with people, the most common feedback was, I'm sorry, we don't have funding. Have you tried calling this other organization? We don't have funding. Try calling back again next month. We can't help you financially, but we do have legal services that we may be able to assist you with. And this agency doesn't provide assistance in your area. And there was even one agency that in their pre-recorded message, when you first called before you got to the directory, pointed out that they don't have prevention funds, which just goes to show that there's a lot of misinformation and lack of direction for people trying to find these services. Next slide. So what do we already know about these programs and what's most effective? Some of the evidence initially points to legal prevention, so legal services being pretty effective. And while some of the random control trial studies have been inconclusive, they've shown that while paired with other services, they're very, very helpful. Similar to supportive services, there's little specific evidence to show their isolated effect because they're primarily paired with other services such as financial or legal. But again, the preliminary results seem really promising. And then finally, for the financial assistance, this covers both one-time assistance as well as short-term assistance. They show that rapid, and I really can't stress that enough, but rapid financial assistance is both effective and cost-saving. It's effective in the sense that if you're $1,000 short on rent and somebody gives you $1,000, that's going to be very effective in covering that. But cost-saving in the sense that the literature says that it costs anywhere between $60,000 to $120,000, depending on where you are in the US, to house somebody who has experienced homelessness. That includes medical costs, supportive costs, as well as rental costs, and then the cost burden put on taxpayers while they're experiencing homelessness. And most of these financial homelessness prevention and eviction prevention programs only costs a couple $1,000s. And so the gap there is huge. And that's really where that cost savings comes in. Next slide. And this really gets us to these flexible funding programs, also known as flex funds. And these funds are really intended to be that rapid source of funding. They often meet people who have expressed immediate needs and provide really rapid, low barrier services, often across multiple populations. Alan, do you have a question?
Sorry, thank you. Just to comment, we were talking about the cost thing on the previous slide. Left off of your discussion was the cost to landlords for eviction. It's expensive. And
Yeah.
it's a cost that they would avoid if they knew about it and thought about it the way that I think about it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's an extremely expensive and painstaking process to go through as well on both ends. Yeah, so the flex funds, they're low barrier funds that can help with a litany of things. And there's preliminary data from ASHAC statewide evaluation of the Arizona Flex Fund that shows that there are multiple positive health outcomes, higher housing stabilization rates, and decreased homelessness inflows up to 2/3, so 67% of inflow into the already very overwhelmed system that is homeless services. And so flex funds can be extremely, extremely beneficial. And Kenny, did you have a question? You popped your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was curious on this slide. Is there any information on repeat use of funds? I know that's a concern people often have. And what's the time frame of measurement? Are people stabilizing after a month and then that lasts for like 6 months, or over 3 months and then staying housed for a year? Is there any indication?
Yeah, Keith, do you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, Kenny, great questions. So the window on these numbers that we're looking at here, that's over a 6-month time horizon. How many people did we see enter homelessness 6 months post funding? And then it depends on the program, but most of the prevention funds allowed repeated use. TPCH allowed repeated use. The vast majority of people had one gift or got funds one time, but we had I don't want to make up numbers off the top of my head, but something like 15% of people received 2 or 3 gifts. We tried to look at that specifically to see if receiving more gifts seemed to be associated with positive outcomes or not. But basically the sample sizes are too small currently, but we are seeing no sort of negative effect as you'd expect of repeated funding. But allowing people to return to these funds is one of the central recommendations of how these things need to be structured, in addition to what Zach mentioned before, that the eligibility requirement should be very manageable so that they can be provided rapidly. But thank you for those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then next slide.
Thank you so much, Zach. Any final comments at this point?
Nope.
Okay, and I've told Zach to please jump in as needed as I go along here. Okay, so what would a better system look like? So we have some feedback directly solicited from frontline staff. So these are people who work in these 17 agencies that we've been talking about. So we basically said, thinking about homelessness prevention, what additional programs do you think we would need? So basically here, we basically need better utility support that LIHEAP doesn't always cover people, and losing service connection, especially for AC during the summer, can be quite dangerous. One person said we need more rental assistance subsidies coupled with unemployment insurance. I strongly agree with that. I think that unemployment, when someone applies for food stamps or unemployment, that's an obvious moment to connect with them to check in about their housing status. And is usually indicative of some kind of financial challenge that the household is encountering. This is the 30% AMI threshold I mentioned earlier. Basically, people aren't earning enough to qualify for homelessness prevention, are earning too much to qualify for homelessness prevention funds. And again, this is usually directly about federally funded, HUD funded homelessness prevention dollars. Here, this person basically says, we need a lot of stuff, early intervention, low barrier access with quick turnarounds on funds, flexible funds, case management, financial literacy, workforce development opportunities, integration connection with other services as needed, community buy-in, leadership valuing the benefits of prevention, and more cost-effective than crisis response and trauma-informed policy practices. So that kind of covers a lot, but I think this really speaks to the diversity of needs that people have, and what's any specific household or individual is going to need to be in a sustainable housing situation might be quite different. Here we have, we do our best to encourage landlords to accept assistance, but we often hear concerns that the tenant will fall behind again. Offering incentives can help, but not always. If a landlord has any kind of prior issue with a tenant, even if it's been resolved, they're less likely to work with us, irrespective of the tenant's current occupation. So I think this is also speaking to either the need for more landlord engagement or more incentives for landlords, or insurance or protections or reassurances that they may need to engage with these programs that are trying to rehouse people. Okay, these are recommendations from people who received the TPCH Flex Fund. What could be better? They thought it could be more visible. This program was not extremely visible on purpose because the funds were limited, but people thought it could be more visible. That would be better. They said we need ongoing financial support. It'd be great to have case management or follow-up support. Legal assistance was not offered, but some people needed that. And then last, a couple of people mentioned that particularly domestic violence responsiveness was not good, or an area where they experienced some challenges, and that's an area to bolster. Okay, I'm just going to leave this here. I'm not going to talk through this. This is like really far down the line that there are some very impressive programs using big data and predictive modeling to kind of target people upstream. This, I encourage you to take a look at this if you're curious. It's very impressive. Basically involved cold calls to individuals who had been flagged as high risk of homelessness, right? Usually some combination of something happening with their credit score, something happening with an application for food stamps or unemployment insurance, or people reaching out for services. We're kind of put into a model to identify the people at highest risk of homelessness, and then they are literally contacted by caseworkers and offered funds to stabilize them. This program, the data so far is extremely impressive, but I'm going to kind of rush past this to say this is a little bit ideal and down the line, and we have a lot of kind of basic system features that we need to figure out long before we're going to get to something like this. But just to say that our homelessness prevention strategies can be as complex as this. Okay, so I'm looking at the time here, and I'm going to go through these quickly. I'll leave you to read the details on the slides. I just want to make sure we have some time for some back and forth. So there is no coordinated homelessness prevention system in Pima County. We should develop one, and I think it makes the most sense for local government to kind of staff and carry out this type of activity. Like I said before, there are multiple like action guides and kind of resource outlines. So this is from Ending Homelessness Before It Starts. Like I said earlier, you got to gather partners. It should be data driven. You figure out what you have, what you don't have, and then you develop an action plan to meet those needs. It sounds all real simple when I say it like that, but I understand this takes time and is complex. But the other thing I'll say, as Zach was giving us a sense of earlier, our homelessness prevention infrastructure is not infinite. It's actually quite small. And so collaborating across a smaller group of agencies and just like primarily 2 local governments is quite manageable. And like I said earlier, is something that we have built more experience doing cross-silo in recent efforts like the Housing Central Command effort. Okay, so hard for people to get accurate information. I can't emphasize enough how damaging this is for people's mental health when they are stressed about losing a basic human need like housing. Putting people in these runaround loops and wasting their time is really cruel, and something that we could very, very easily improve. So ways to reduce burden on clients is remove outdated information, require publication dates to be added to flyers or any promotion of services. We definitely need, but before we fix the system, we need more housing navigators to help people negotiate this very confusing system that we have. And ideally, I think we should have a centralized repository for accurate information. It should be very accessible through multiple modes. I think a housing insecurity hotline would be amazing. It's something that was set up during COVID, something that could be done again. So basically having either a no wrong door type of referral that will get people to that centralized information source, or just having a community agreed upon centralized access point to which people could be referred. This again is something that could be staffed with a couple full-time people, and the reduction in harm and confusion in our community, I think, could be amazing. I really think, regardless of what is recommended, this needs to come with an intention to staff and fund this for the long term. 211 is sort of like constantly already, from the perspective of clients, is not doing a good job at all. Very critical views on 211, but it's also something that's constantly vulnerable to losing funding. It's absurd. Like, our whole community depends on this, and this is something that to me feels like something that should be a stable sourced resource and service in our community. Okay, this I'm just going to rush through. Even if people had accurate information about resources, there are not enough supports for everyone who needs to be served. I think we could really, again, reduce harm by providing realistic information to clients about how likely it is that they're going to get served. And I think that will allow people to make more rational plans. We have a good chunk of people who are wasting time waiting for services that are never going to come, and no one is telling them that they are not going to receive those services. So what are the actual timelines? When is something really likely to come online for them? Because usually that's well beyond the kind of crisis state with their current housing situation. Because of that reality in the short term, I really wish we could provide people with a wider range of housing navigation supports. So ways to provide like light case management on the phone to help someone try to figure out a more sustainable housing arrangement for them, knowing that they're not actually going to get to the point of being served by a caseworker. Furthermore, I wonder if we can make referrals to other types of community organizations or other nonprofits that are not currently well networked in the prevention space to, again, try to help someone find a new landing spot, knowing that they're not going to go through the kind of traditional homeless response system, right? Because we can only serve a fraction of the current need. Again, I think there are urgent situations that people are finding themselves in like in an emergency context, again, fleeing abuse or tragedy, right? Those moments, there's a level of psychological overwhelm and a place where I think simple housing navigation, like helping someone identify a unit on Craigslist that maybe they could afford, just going through those practical steps, helping them in negotiating the scams and the fake rental ads and things like that, so they can get to a more reasonable landing spot on a faster timeline, but not requiring extensive interaction with service providers. These folks often don't have a mental health problem. They don't have a behavioral health problem. They don't have a substance use problem. They don't need some of the wider range of supports that people experiencing homelessness need. They just really need help, usually a small amount of money and some light navigation to get into a more stable housing situation. So that more supportive diversion is what I'm calling that, is something that I think is a very clear need, again, on our way to whatever a better system would look like. We have very vulnerable people entering homelessness from institutions and housing programs. This is an obvious place where we could scale up better planning for re-entry. And I really want to emphasize that there's so much focus on substance use amongst people experiencing homelessness. If we have 12 households a month, roughly, it's more than that, I'm sure, but we have roughly 12 households a month that are in a substance use program. They're looking for services from TPCH because they're going to be homeless soon. Those are folks who are doing the right thing. They are trying to get treatment, they're trying to get clean. And the idea that we would let them just exit back onto the street into unsheltered homelessness, it's a waste of all the money we invested in them to try to get them more stable. And it's just simply causing this high utilization of systems over time and not really putting people on a pathway back to sustainability. This, again, is a pretty discrete and smaller number of people that need specialized support. And I think kind of reentry teams to support people with those unique situations and health considerations would be very powerful and helpful. Jay, homelessness prevention is underfunded locally, right? So I'm not telling you how to do it, but we need more money. Obviously, federal and state sources are very unlikely to fund prevention right now. And so to me, it's an appropriate moment for more local funding. The recent action by Pima County to increase the property tax to support affordable housing and homelessness prevention, I think, is a great example of this. And I also think we could definitely use more local resources from the city of Tucson through whatever mechanism the electeds think is appropriate to support the type of recommendations that are made here for these kind of system and program reforms, to support things like flexible financial assistance that is so useful when other funds are not used, cannot be used for particular clients. And again, we really need to bolster sustainability planning supports. So once someone is rehoused or once someone is stabilized in their existing housing, we have to make sure that their new situation is sustainable. And there are people who literally do this. This is their job, to do sustainability planning. And we simply need substantially more of that so that the prevention funds we're spending now are not wasted and do not create just kind of this constant situation of people finding themselves in crisis again, because they really need to be in a cheaper unit, or they really need to be connected to benefits that they currently don't have and need. Prevention supports need to be diverse. I won't belabor this, but this is the point I was making before about people coming into homelessness because of these different reasons. They need different types of support. So we need to target, healthcare needs when that's appropriate, emergency housing options when abuse and urgency is the issue. And then people exiting institutions, right? They have their own kind of challenges and issues and need specific tailored supports. We have a lot of the beginnings of this, right? We have some eviction prevention infrastructure that is already up and functioning. We have some very light re-entry infrastructure for people exiting incarceration, but these are all things that would need to be bolstered and staffed up to meet the volume of need. Okay, and then I don't want to blow past the fact that all of this fundamentally is driven by the lack of affordable housing. The most upstream way to prevent homelessness is to create more affordable housing. I don't need to belabor this. I think everyone here agrees this, but I do think we have existing strategies that it would make sense to me for this commission to point to, such as the Prosperity Initiative that's already been passed by the city of Tucson, and that in the bigger picture, investing into an adequate supply of affordable housing will reduce the longer term costs of homelessness prevention. So I think we need to bolster prevention now, as we are probably entering a recession soon with high housing cost burden, but looking down the line, hopefully those costs will go down as we grow our supply of affordable housing. Last, I just want to say there's a lot going on in this space, and this idea of having people who are thinking more proactively about where to collaborate, what are the appropriate roles for the city versus for the county versus for a particular set of nonprofit agencies serving a specialty population. Staffing that to coordinate more effectively with all of these different ongoing efforts, I think is something that would be of a benefit to the city to kind of sit more efficiently and kind of like effectively within all these different streams of activity. So that was so long. We tried really hard to make this as efficient as possible. The end of the presentation has a bunch of resources, but let me just stop there.
Yeah, Kenny.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's tremendous amount of information and research put together. I guess I'm narrowing in on within some of the lower hanging fruit of the institutional settings. Is it that there aren't housing reentry services being provided, or are they mismatched somehow? Or like the effectiveness of those? And what's the scale of the number of housing navigators that are kind of out there, right? Whether at the county or with individual organizations, like how big is this team that is accessible?
Kenny, I don't know. I know EELS has housing navigators. A number of providers have housing navigators. I don't have a sense of the staffing. Zach, I don't know if you can speak to that. And I'll just mention very quickly, I know we have a new reentry program from Pima County, but I've also, from conversations with staff, and maybe this has changed, but from conversations with staff, there was basically like understaffing and also some like access issues where they were having to literally like approach people as they were leaving the jail in the evening and try to serve them like as they walked to the car. And so that is not sort of pre-planning, that's not connecting upstream. So I think there's a lot of improvements for the reentry system, but I'll also mention those caseworkers, they don't have access to housing that is connected to landlords that are comfortable with rehousing people who are exiting incarceration. We haven't kind of got to the like long change of supports that we need to make a really effective reentry system exist yet. And then I'll be quiet about the navigators. I don't have a number. Any rough sense, Zach?
Very few. I know that there are, like Keith was saying, the Pima County Jail does have like a reentry program, but it's staffed by like 4 or 5 people. And I think the turnover is rather high there. A lot of the inpatient mental health and behavioral health services also do have some sort of housing navigators, but it's often more of a duty than a job. in the sense that it's like one of 20 other things they're trying to do. And when I've been in contact with these folks, they have seemed incredibly overwhelmed and not really sure like where to start, and not sure how to help. So I think that there is a need for, whatever body ends up taking on this larger project of homelessness prevention to provide those housing navigators to then be able to supplement these services, because the independent agencies, while they are trying and providing some staffing towards it, it's really just not their specialty. And they just lack training, and in large part, the community lacks resources for them to be able to access, which is kind of why they're floundering when trying to help clients.
Yeah,
just,
I mean,
oh, go ahead, Kenny. Yeah, sorry.
no, just even you're pointing out the complexity, right? And so it's a really specialized service in navigation that people are providing. Um, and the quick follow-up was, the sense of like real time and like timely information, so people aren't wasting their time looking for support. What would the outlines of a system like that be? Sharing information across agencies, and does that seem feasible, or is that kind of a pipe dream?
So I can speak to the COC uses a coordinated entry system. So basically for the coordinated entry assessment, people might know it as the VI-SPDAT. They do that and it goes in one centralized pool. And then the agencies actually let the county who manages the pool know when they have an opening. And then the county refers people to there. And so it's not these people are going and searching through these 30 different agencies that provide homeless services. They do one assessment, and then these 30 different agencies sort of let one agency know like when openings have become available, and then they get referred a person, and then they go looking for that person to try to move in. And I think that would be a much faster system. I think modeling it after the coordinated entry system wouldn't be a bad idea. I'm not sure if it's the best model, but I think it's much better than what we would have now.
I'll just say quickly, Kenny, the amount of information, there is complexity, but like as Zach said, there's like 17 organizations. Some of these programs will be stable over time. I see this as like a quarter time or half time responsibility for one staff person to be fully in charge of making sure that this information is up to date on a website and on a hotline. Very manageable, in my opinion, to do this. And this is something we've been trying to do at Zero as kind of like a subsidy to our community. And this is something that interns have been very successfully able to do, literally calling around, right? Like checking in with the providers, seeing what's still on offer, what's available. Highly doable, in my opinion, to keep these things up to date. The current problem is that all existing systems have just asked all the providers to like provide that information to some resource on their own. And that's not going to happen in practice. We need someone who's just, that is their job. And like in the past, we've had someone manually compiling shelter bed information daily, right? We used to do that as a community. It was actually super helpful and it was very manual. It wasn't like a technology solution. It was emailing people at shelters. We can do these things. It just requires staffing.
All right, y'all, we've got 2 minutes left. So Keith and Zach, really appreciate the presentation. It really touched on, I think, basically everything we needed to know about homelessness currently in Tucson and Pima County. And, obviously the solutions that y'all point out as well, I think will be very helpful as we move forward towards providing recommendations to mayor and council about eviction prevention. If anybody has any more questions, I would just suggest maybe write them down and maybe email them to Keith and Zach and see if we can get an answer that way. Maybe we could also have you all back if we have enough questions and want some more information. That's what I would suggest for now, but at this point we do need to move on and work through the last couple of items in the next minute. So with that, Keith and Zach, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
And I dropped both of our emails in the chat, so if people want those.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, work plan for 2025. I think obviously we got a ton of information to digest. I sent out the stuff we had worked with at our last meeting via email yesterday. So, I would just ask that between now and the next meeting, really let's try and digest this information. I think we're getting to a point where we can, probably put some recommendations together, at least as a draft. We've got a couple of more presentations coming up over the next couple of months. So I'm just going to leave it at that for the work plan for now. Moving on to item number 7, call to the audience. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak?
No hand is raised, Jay.
All right. Moving on, agenda item number 8, next steps. I believe everybody can see those, so I'm not going to go into that. And number 9, if there is nothing else, any other final questions, concerns, we can adjourn, but I do just want to pause to see if there's any questions or concerns. Go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, I think I saw in the planning ahead for, additional presentations to the subcommittee. I'm wondering if it might be useful to hear from Cashew prior to TPCH again, if that would kind of bring more information to the table or if others think it's helpful to continue and dive deeper.
So you're just basically suggesting have change the order of the next 2 presentations?
Yeah.
Neto, can we put a pin in that and see if that's possible, or?
Yes, I can ask Cashew.
Okay, great. And
Yeah.
I guess we can coordinate about that.
Mhm.
Any other questions or concerns before we adjourn? All right, hearing none. Thanks everybody, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.